So it has been a very long time since I've last done a facecam video, and I'm very happy to be back. How y'all doing? The reason I'm doing this today is I want to launch a new series of videos that I'm going to be coming out with. I have done in the past where I've done ghost stories of different locations throughout the world to focus on more of a demographic. But now I do realize that I have not done a horror stories by demographic. I think I've done it for like New York or something like that. So that is what I plan to do. Since all of you guys may know, Letsnotmeet is predominantly a USA kind of community or English-speaking community. I want to take it a little further. I realize a lot of people in other places, especially Asian places, or people in Europe, anywhere, worldwide, love Letsnotmeet. So let's take it from there. Let's do stories from people all over the world. Of course, predominantly, I'm going to be doing Asian stories like this one because, you know, I'm Asian. I have an interest in it as well. So it's like a passion of mine to do all the scary stuff that happens in all countries, whether it be an Asian country or a little town in Europe. It's going to be called 5 True Scary Horror Asian and Worldwide Horror Stories that are going to be coming out, and this is the first video today. So without further ado, let us grab a blanket, turn off your lights for true scary horror stories that happened in Singapore. I was gonna start singing there.
Slow hand. This happened a few years back when I was around 18 years old. Although I was a guy, but back then, I had long flowing hair. I was in a band, and quite a slim figure, so there were times people mistook me for a female from some angles. I'm from Singapore, a relatively safe place. I was on quite a long bus ride home with 2 of my friends, so seeing that there are plenty of seats, my 2 friends and I sat down. They sat with each other while I sat alone on a bench. Being a long bus ride, I fell asleep soon. I don't know how long I've slept, until I felt some tingling in my nether regions. Groggy and pissed off, I opened my eyes and saw that the bus had pretty much filled up, and now there's this quite refined old man beside me. He had on a neatly ironed shirt with dress pants and shoes. I shifted my eyes down south, and to my horror, that tingling sensation was no dream. The man beside me had one hand reading the papers, while his other hand was directly under my sack of nuts, wriggling happily. Now, I was wearing a t-shirt with a loose plaid shirt and slim jeans, so I thought to myself maybe this guy thought I was a girl. Now I was confused as hell and uncomfortable as hell. This man must have known I was awake, but still, I don't really know how to react in this sort of situation, so I gently used one of my hands and slowly pushed his hand away from my nuts. I thought it was over and quickly tried going back to sleep. Moments later, I felt the same wriggling, and behold, his hands were juggling my circus balls again. This time I just shoved his hands out of my ornaments and looked at him straight. Amazingly, this man was just reading his paper nonchalantly and didn't even bother to meet my eyes. My friends had their earplugs on and didn't notice much. My staring and not falling asleep anymore must have warned the guy, and he didn't do anything for the remainder of the trip. When I got off the bus, I told my friends what happened, and they all went crazy and asked why I didn't speak up or do anything about it. Frankly, I was confused as hell, and honestly, I really didn't know what to do. I was stunned, I guess. Despite being quite the aggressive person, I normally wouldn't take shit, but this was different. It was weird. I know that guy must have known I was a guy, but I shudder to think if I was a girl, and someone did that to me. From that day onwards, I swear, if I ever see such a thing happen again to someone else, be it guy or girl, I'm going to walk up and smack them right in the face. I totally understand how a molest victim felt now. Weird student gang. I decided to share my story on here, after lurking in the subreddit for a few weeks, and have observed that the community here is overall mature and supportive. A couple of things first. I'm from Singapore, a small Southeast Asian country where most of the middle school, or known as secondary schools here, students wear uniforms with a school badge pin on left breast pocket or on left collar. And back then in the 1980s, guys who were around 7th to 8th grade, lower secondary, wore knee-length shorts as part of the uniform, while those in grade 9 to 10 upper secondary wore full-length pants. This encounter took place in 1987, when I was in lower secondary, aged 12. Finally, no, I did not read Stephen King's It until the TV miniseries came out a few years later. It was after school, and I decided to take one of the numerous routes home, which was walking from a bus stop that is about a mile away from home. The route was along a small road that is through a quiet, affluent neighborhood before hitting a busy main road right next to where my home is. So it was pretty remote, with no passerby most of the time, and at most a car or two traveling along the small road. It was around 7 p.m. The sky was still very bright and the road was quiet as usual. I was in deep thoughts about preparing for upcoming exams before I heard some quick footsteps close behind me. I moved to the side and let whoever the person was to walk past me. It was not a person, but a group of students from another school. 5 guys in white shirts with olive pants, while I was in white shirt with navy blue shorts. They suddenly stopped and boxed me in. All 5 of them were at least 1 foot taller than myself. I was around 4 feet tall then, and they had a weird, serious look on their typical faces of young schoolboys, and gave off a really weird vibe. I was very frightened, fearing that these 5 could be one of those juvenile gangs I'd heard of. I was frantically searching for any other passerby or any other car on the road, anything that I could call help for. However, there were only the 6 of us on the road. Then I noticed they did not have school badges on their shirts. Probably they didn't want to reveal which school they belonged to. This is not good. What did these seniors want from me? I was on the brink of tearing up. I was frozen in fear. My mind was a mess. Couldn't think of getting myself out of the situation. It was a long, awkward silence of us, staring at each other, before one of them said, "Friend," and reached out his right hand, gesturing for me to shake it. I hesitated for a while, confused by this turn of events, before I slowly reached out my right hand to shake it. Then I was hit on my left shoulder by another guy, probably irked by my unwillingness to shake the hand, and said, "Why? You don't want to be friends with us?" "Come, follow us," said the first guy, who I had to shake the hand with. They then aggressively herded me towards a T-junction ahead of us, despite my repeated pleas that I need to go back home for dinner soon. There we turned right to another small road, and stopped near a storm drain cover. One of them proceeded to lift the drain cover and climb down through the opening to the drain below. "Come, we have good stuff down here," said the first guy before he climbed down. The remaining 3 pushed me closer to the opening, prompting me to climb down as well. I stood there, hesitated. The sky was getting dark. I was panicky, and was desperately hoping for someone else to appear and save me from the moment. Anyone. Then the second guy hit me on the shoulder again. "Why? You scared?" Thanks to that hit, I suddenly had an idea. I crouched down and pretended to tie my shoelace, waiting for an opening to make a run for it. Then, another one proceeded to climb down the opening. I looked up and noticed the remaining 2 did not pay attention to me. I dashed off immediately and ran as fast as I could. I did not look back, but from their shouts and the sounds of their footsteps, I knew there were at least 2 of them chasing after me, and they were catching up. Still, no sign of any other passerby or car, and it was about 200 meters around the left bend before the main road was in sight. I was crying and shouting for help throughout. Suddenly, I felt a hard tug on my backpack. My heart skipped a beat. Instinctively, I let go of my backpack and continued to run. I'm not certain whether I ran really fast or they gave up chasing after me. But they got my backpack, and I managed to make it to the familiar streetlight, lit main road, and I shouted at the passerbys there for help. Thankfully, a kind elderly lady walked towards me and embraced me while I ran towards her in tears and out of breath. My pursuers were no longer in sight. At that moment, they were gone. The kind lady escorted me to my home, where I broke down again as I recounted my encounter to my parents. Later, we made a police report as I left my house key in my backpack. We went back to the same location with a police officer, where I pointed out the particular storm drain. The 5 students were not down there, of course, and my backpack was never recovered. I avoided that particular route for the rest of my middle school years. So, to the 5 guys who traumatized me, no, I still do not want to be your friend. What's the weather like? Apologies for spacing in advance, I'm on my cell phone. Reading this thread reminds me of something that happened to me weekly over a 3-month period when I was with what must have been the 5th grade, growing up in Singapore. I would get home from school most days between 3:30 and 3:40, and if I had an extracurricular, it would be closer to 5. My mom was ill at the time and had to go to the doctor a lot, but I would always be home by 4:30 at the latest. My dad would be home from the office around 6 o'clock, unless he was teaching a night class. That was, of course, meant that some days I'd be home alone for an hour or so, no biggie, until the weatherman started calling. Looking back, the idea of a dude calling a house when the only child is home sends a chill up my spine. But I was very talkative on the phone when I was a little kid, and my parents were having problems, and I didn't have a lot of friends, so it was nice for me to have somebody to talk to. Now the weatherman was a guy with what I can recall, a bit 15 or so years later, was a very musical-sounding voice and a very pristine English accent. I remember it was sometime in mid-October when the call started, because I had just sung in a school performance with some friends. Anyways, he would call at around 3:45, and he'd tell me he was calling from a faraway country, and what country was I in, and what was the weather like over there. Sunny? Every phone call would start with the weather report. Oh, how lovely, because where he was, it was very dark, and he was only calling because he had to do the weather report in a few hours. What was my name? What a pretty name. And what a lovely adult way I had of speaking on the phone. I might have conned on to the creepiness of the calls when he called once when my mom had gone home in the middle of his call and hung up abruptly when he heard her ask who I was speaking to. I might have even caught on to its creepiness when he said he liked the color of my uniform shirt. I remember thinking he had looked it up when I told him what school I went to. Stupidly, I did not catch on, and only realized it was actually scary what was going on when I was late getting home one day, and walked in at close to 4 p.m. to the phone ringing off the hook. I picked up the phone, only to be berated by the weatherman about how rude it was to keep a friend waiting, and how bad chocolate was for one's teeth. I didn't answer the phone at 3:45 again for as long as we lived in that house, even though it would ring and ring and ring. I got a lot of grief from my mom until I told her about the calls, after which point she made sure her appointment times never conflicted with me coming home from school. In fact, she insisted on walking me to and from the bus stop until we moved 6 months later. Needless to say, the phone calls stopped. I sometimes catch myself wondering whether whether if one of the neighbors was just a lonely old expat man who wanted a friend and thought the weatherman ploy was just a way to talk to somebody occasionally. But then he knew when my mom wasn't home and when I stopped for a chocolate bar. I suppose I'm lucky. It never went beyond the phone calls. The only time I hitchhiked. There have been more than a few times where I've been stalked or wolf whistled at before, though I live in a really safe country like Singapore. However, this one incident sticks out like a sore thumb, mainly because we were saved just at the right time. My childhood friend and I wanted to spend a day at this nice dam, which was located in the midst of a forested area. It's a nice place for couples to schmoozy and families to hang out. However, you can only get there by private transport. We were probably 18 years old at the time, and we got there at a bus stop and decided to walk by foot there. This dam was pretty near an airport, which had ceased operations. It was still being used though, and we took pretty rad and close-up pics of planes. So anyways, we were walking deeper inside, and we got lost. We were at this industrial area, and there was no human traffic at all. There were a few cars and taxis driving past, and the drivers honked at us, as if warning us that we shouldn't be there. We would have walked for about 2 hours, and we wanted to give up. That was when we first saw this animal van driving past us. The driver slowed down and said something. I dismissed him as creepy and held on to my friend tight. About 15 minutes later, when I was trying to take close-up pictures of a plane, the guy stopped his van, rolled down his windows, and asked us what we were doing out, alone. We gave him blunt replies to shoo him away. He said he could give us a lift, but we were really wary because the pickup van looked seedy. My friend wanted to get in, but I stopped her. He went off his way. My friend was on the phone with her boyfriend, and he got super pissed because apparently prostitutes kind of frequent that area, and the place is known for illegal stuff as such. We were trembling at this point and trying to hail a cab, though we didn't have cash on us. About 18 minutes later, when we were walking past this dilapidated lane, we came across this huge group of construction workers. They were on the other side of the lane and were leering at us openly. They were wolf whistling, and all of them went quiet. They stood there watching, like a hawk, watching our every move. There were about 11 of them, eager, and they were speaking in dialect to each other, plotting something. Just then, the animal van screeched and halted in front of us. The same man asked us to get in. He said he can drop us wherever we wanted, and we're really far away from the dam anyways. We didn't argue and got in. True enough, he dropped us nearby our houses. But not without scolding us. Well, we deserved it, I guess. And thank goodness, he was there in the nick of time. Or God knows what. Do you know where MALCOM Road is? Hi. This is my first Reddit post, so sorry if I make any mistakes. This happened in late June, about a year ago. It was a holiday in my country, and my family decided to go to Singapore to enjoy ourselves. We spent the first 5 days visiting the shopping malls and eating in restaurants. At the third day, we woke up late and had to eat breakfast at 11 a.m. or so. We went to the nearest shopping mall and walked to the food court to grab a bite. Keep in mind that I was a short, skinny 14-year-old Asian guy, so I looked and felt very vulnerable. While my sister and parents looked around to order food, I went to the restroom, alone. I walked through the entrance and saw the urinals on the left. I was about to use one of them when the guy using the urinal nearest to the exit, at the time he's right next to me, turned around and stared at me. I stood there looking at his face because I didn't know what to do. I mean, if some dude just turned around to face you and stared at your face right after he took a piss, wouldn't you be surprised? I was dazed and noticed how unkempt he was. The guy was outright filthy. He was fat and had a messy-ass beard. He wore a white shirt that looked like it hadn't been washed for days. It was yellowish. I wondered for a second how he could be in here, as the mall I was in was quite fancy. Then he opened his mouth and asked me, "Do you know where Malcolm Road is?" The question was innocent enough, and I answered that I'm not from around here, and I didn't know where Malcolm Road is. Then he said, "Because, you know, Malcolm Road looks like this." He pointed out his crotch, and I unknowingly looked at it and saw his dick, penis, groin, cock in full view. He was wide-eyed and smiled creepily. Apparently, when he turned around from the urinal to face me, he did not zip his pants and let it all hang out, and I was just too stupid to notice. I backed off without saying a word and went to the furthest urinal and pissed while looking over my shoulder. I was scared he was going to rape or do something to me or something, but luckily he just stood there, still with his dick out in the open. The mall was pretty crowded, and soon enough, a group of people entered the restroom. Then he did the same thing to those people. So yeah, filthy dude in the toilet. Let's not ever meet again.